Hey everyone, and welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast, where we talk to geniuses throughout the commercial real estate and building automation industries, asking them how they've gotten where they are, who's walked alongside them, and how they're helping others along the way. This is episode 1 of season 2, and I am your host, Tim Vogel. Thank you so much to everyone who watched throughout season 1. All that content is still available, and we have some amazing guests lined up for season 2. I cannot wait to share all those conversations with you very, very soon. So we will be releasing episodes every week. And until then, let's get right in to episode 1. In today's episode, we're speaking with Jim Young of Realcomm. Hey, Jim, welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast.
Hey, Tim. Well, I thank you for having me. I'm not sure I would qualify as a genius, but thank you for having me.
That's okay. We set the bar high, and you've made it. So I would just embrace the term and accept it.
I appreciate that, and I think there's a relative correlation between genius and a level of gray hair and bags on under your eyes. To qualify as a genius, you have had to put in a lot of hours in this smart building world.
Yeah, for sure. Which no doubt you have. Absolutely. And so thank you so much for being a part not only of this project that we call the Building Geniuses podcast, but also now episode 1. So with that, Jim, why don't you tell our audience, in case they're unfamiliar, who you are and what you do and what Realcomm is?
Well, I would say that, first of all, that it is amazing how fast 25 years have flown by, right? So for those of you getting into the industry or just starting out, be careful because it flies by. I remember, the first Realcomm in Chicago, and, if you would have told me I'd be sitting here 25 years later on this topic, I probably would have doubted it, But, getting the built environment to make changes and significant scalable changes is a heavy lift. It takes everybody on board to do it. And no one person, no one organization is going to be able to pull it off. It's going to have to be a collective effort. But it has definitely been a wild journey. So to start, I think just to give your listeners a little bit of context, my journey did not start in building technology. It started in IT. And I started selling mini computers way back when. But the first significant thing that I'll mention in my journey that is absolutely relevant today is I was there when the industry went through a paradigm shift from mini computers, one system, one vendor, proprietary, to open and integrated, interoperable IP-based systems. Think Novell. Actually, before Novell, it was Banyan Vines. That burnt at the vine, literally. And then Novell came in, and then Microsoft came right behind that with Windows NT to really say, you should be able to hook up a printer from any manufacturer to this network, and it shouldn't be just a Wang or a DEC or an IBM printer. And believe me, that was revolutionary because when you bought a system back then, you bought all components from one vendor, including the cable. Does that sound familiar? Sure does. Okay. And if you keep the building industry in the back of your head with some of the vendors who go way back, one building, one system, one vendor. So the first thing I got to see was the shifting of a paradigm and how hard it is and how noisy it is when one side is trying to hold on to a technology framework and a new framework is threatening it. There was 3, 5, 7, maybe even 10 years of confusion where people were still using mini computers and others jumped right into the distributed PC world. But I do think I think it's worth noting that anybody studying the current building, automation, smart building world, it's probably not a bad idea to understand what happened back then. So I went through these technology companies, learned a lot, ended up selling some pretty large, sophisticated telecommunication networks and multiple CPU networks. And that's really where I learned the concept of an enterprise. Not just one computer, but money, not just one building, but a portfolio. So I came to this industry with a really good foundation on enterprise IT/IP computing. And when I got here and I went into my first building and I knew I was very interested in moving over to the built environment, always wanted to be a developer, always loved buildings as a kid. And finally, one day I just said, enough of this general tech Fortune 250 computer networks. I want to apply everything I've learned to the built environment. Boy, was I shocked. I got over here and, people were walking around, veterans of foreign war, lodges, and looking at flyers for buildings for sale. Email didn't exist. Nobody knew what a network was. I worked for a brokerage company that their big PC investment was 3 Macintosh Lisas, I think. I mean, these were the old square, the little robot-y looking things. I mean, there was no investment in technology. So I knew I had my work cut out for me. And so I left that company where I brought a significant amount of technology to that brokerage company, really life-changing, fundamental changes. That, by the way, that company is still in some way, shape, or form using today, 30 years later, which is kind of funny.
Wow.
From there, I started a consulting company, the Jameson Group, a real estate technology consulting company. Nobody had ever heard of that, with the exception of a few who were doing accounting implementations and such. But the general market did not know what a technology consulting firm was. And then that was in 95. And then in 99, that morphed from a consulting company into 2 companies. The first was a cloud-based ERP platform for a brokerage company, kind of early, right? Nobody was using cloud. Back then, we called them application service providers. Now you'd call it cloud. So we built that in 99, sold that in 08. And then the other company we started concurrently was Realcom. And the whole idea there was there are so many moving pieces in a real estate transaction, from the time you conceive to build it, to building it, to leasing it, to managing it, to selling it. And, spreadsheets were very rarely being used back then, right? And so I said, there's got to be an opportunity to apply sophisticated technology to the built environment. Let's hold a party, see if anybody comes. And we did. And surprisingly, about 800 people showed up. From there, it went to 2,000 in 2000, and then about 2,500 people in 2001. We thought we were the smartest people on the planet. Little did we know we were in the middle of dot bomb. And by 2001, everything collapsed. We hung on, and did the best we could to survive. And then here we are, 25 years later, getting ready to go to Las Vegas to celebrate our 25th anniversary.
Looking forward to being there. That's going to be a great show.
Yep. It's going to be great. Yeah, lots of conversations.
You talked about this time back when you were selling mini computers. You said 3, 5, or 10 years. So there's a period of time there of confusion and of transition from the mini computers to this more interoperable model. Was it clear where the market was going to go during that time of transition? Try to go back to that mindset at that time. I mean, it seemed like, there was a trend, yes.
I was a senior sales rep. My territory was the Midwest. I'm not sorry, the Midwest, the West. And one of my big territories, because they have a lot of law firms there, I was selling law firm software, were 2 specific law firms, Snell and Wilmer, and I can't remember the other one. It was down the street, literally down the middle of Phoenix. And Snell and Wilmer had bought one of the last mini computers. O'Connor Kavanaugh was the name of the firm. And O'Connor Kavanaugh was experimenting with this thing called a distributed PC. And the Novell networking wasn't out that. They were actually using Banyan Vine's software as the operating system to connect. It was not ready for prime time. So I would go back and forth between those 2 law firms, one saying, I want the best of the last iteration, and another saying, I want the totally disastrous, chaotic first version of the next book, right? And it's an interesting place because I could understand both sides, where I don't want to take risks to that level, and the other one saying, why would I take a risk on something who's seen its day? So I literally, in the course of that 3-4 months, I was one of the lead salespeople on this new idea called a distributed PC. So I was there front seat watching all the angst. And then what was really interesting is over the years, say the next 3-4 years, is they were trying to connect mini computer or PCs to mini computers, right? So it was more integrated. Think of some of the things we see in the smart building world, right? Let me do some let me do some terminal emulation, right? That's now my PC is emulating a terminal, but I can't transfer data, but I can at least see the mini computer on my PC. Oh my God. I mean, for years that went on, and big companies, 3270 emulation, Wang systems emulation. And then all of a sudden people started saying, well, I want to network a WANG VS and a DEC VAX. Oh my gosh, now we're at the communication layer, and we had all these big boxes with blinking lights that would connect these things. But on the other side of the street was these people saying, you guys keep wasting your time on that stuff. We're going to move forward on this new thing called a PC and a network interface card and RJ45s. And it felt like about 5 years before Novell came and brought us that, more scalable operating system. And then ultimately, Microsoft passed them because they came out with a graphical user interface that was pretty easy to use. And it feels like about 5-7 years that this transition was taking place.
You have kind of the promise of this new technology, but then this risk reward. How much do I invest in something new, knowing that it's going to have all these issues? It's like buying the first model year of a new vehicle. It's like maybe I'll wait for the second.
But the correlation between what I experienced back then and what we're going through still, I identified these problems when I first got into it. So that's 25 years ago. And we've been trying to break down the barriers. And we have. We have got more examples now of open, integrated, interoperable, stitching together various platforms. But what we don't have, I don't think, I haven't seen it, is a truly neutral operating system that allows you to plug in an HVAC device from one manufacturer and an access control system, literally like you would, install a new printer or a new scanner or a new workstation. You plug it into the network, it understands it at the communication level, and then you just download the drivers and boom, data's moving, right? Applications are working. We still don't have that yet. I at least that I think I've seen. Hopefully we see it soon.
If you were to put on maybe a fortune teller hat, if you will, but it's an educated guess, where are we in that transition to having this more kind of everything interoperable? Are we halfway through it? Are we a third of the way through it? Or do we have a third to go?
I think unfortunately, we've got more than a third to go. When that happened in the PC in the computing world, where you weren't going to go proprietary, mini computer, and you were going to go this distributed network of PCs, that was a relatively short period for transition. If it was 5 or 7, or even if it was 10, I don't think you're going to find too many mini computers out there today. Okay. There may be a few holding on with their accounting applications or something like that. But for the most part, people have moved to heavy duty servers, blade servers, complex network, cloud. Now it's even not, I don't even want my own servers. Everything's going to be in the cloud. So relatively speaking, that paradigm shift happened pretty quick. This one, I'm 25 years into it, and I think we're at second inning.
Yeah,
maybe.
Wow.
Second or third inning. It should have happened faster. Now, I think maybe why the other one did happen faster is because there was so much more at stake with business computing and consumer computing. The market was, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And there was a lot of incentive to get to the next thing quick. The built environment, even though we're big, we got lots of buildings, it's been a little more stubborn. And I don't understand why. Maybe the owners don't care as much about the operating side, the expense side of the business. But we've made progress, but it certainly, in my opinion, not at the speed we should have.
Well, what's interesting to think about too is computing, like the end result of a higher level of computing is better throughput, better information sharing, our ability to have conversations over the internet like this. How much technology does a building ultimately need?
Well, I didn't even know you were going to say that, but that's a perfect segue to a point I wanted to make. When I first left the computing industry, General Tech, and came over, we did not focus on smart buildings at first. We focused more on brokerage and transactions, and then ultimately operations of a building. And then it was probably by 2002, so that's only 3 years, when I wrote an article called Connecting Buildings and Processes to the Internet Appliances. And I remember the day it happened. I was in a building, and I looked up at the lights, and I looked over at the door control, and I looked over at the air conditioning vents, and I looked at the exit sign, and I go, oh my God, there are a lot of IP addresses in this building, right? And to me, they should not be separate systems from separate manufacturers like I had experienced in the computing world. These should all be systems that are open, that can plug into a wireless or a fixed wired network. and become all together, right? So I just looked at every electrical mechanical device in the building as a potential IP address. So fast forward, I was in Montana this summer, past summer, brand new hotel, great looking, right in the middle of downtown, and I'm walking in and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty, got to be high tech, right? It's brand new. Lo and behold, right behind the registration desk, they had for some reason, that's where they wanted to put all the controls for all the major systems in the hotel. And there they were, disparate number one, disparate number two, disparate. There was no connectivity. There was no integration, no interoperability. I looked at my wife and she's tired of hearing it. I go, there we go. And she goes,
yeah.
Can't you ever she goes, can't you ever not think about that? I go, well, everywhere I go, I see my favorite one is the fire extinguisher. I mean, listen to this. Okay, you said, what inning are we in? This battle's been going on for 40 years. You walk into any location. I went and got some lunch the other day, and there in the corner was the fire extinguisher with the little cardboard, like index card, January, February, March through December. And in 2023, a human being drives an internal combustion engine full of gasoline to a location and then proceeds to walk around every location in that campus with a hole punch. Now that hole punch is that's a contemporary high-tech tool, okay? I had one as a paper boy when I was 12, okay?
Yeah.
With their hole punch, they punch January, February. You could, and I don't know why somebody hasn't done this one, but you could create a cradle, wireless connection. You could probably even do it low voltage enough where you didn't need too much power. And with that thing was taken off the cradle, send an alert. It got to a certain pressure, send an alert. It got obstructed by a crate standing in front of it, a little camera, send an alert. Nope. So anytime somebody tells me that they really know what they're talking about in building automation, smart buildings, I hold up a fire extinguisher and I say, prove it to me. That's sort of my litmus test.
It's kind of like when you ask a salesperson, sell me this pen. Ask a smart building person, how do you make a fire extinguisher smart?
But honestly, we've had that fire extinguisher conversation that I remember since 2005. I mean, I wrote about it in that 2002 article, connecting connecting building appliances to this thing called the internet. And I remember, I think I referenced a fire extinguisher. So that's 21 years. I remember being in Dubai in 2006, holding up a fire extinguisher. I looked a lot younger, and there's all the sheikhs and in the front row, and there I am. I'm holding up my fire extinguisher. And then a friend of mine just sent me an email about 3 months ago, top building in New York, top retailer in New York. And he says, Jim, we just did some maintenance, and he sent me the picture. And then 2 weeks ago, I went to get some lunch, and there it was again. So haven't made any progress.
Yeah,
technology is not the problem. I mean, you could probably take a grad student or third, fourth year engineering student and build that device for the fire extinguisher. You could retrofit all the existing, but for some reason the industry is slow to move.
Yeah. Jim, if you needed to boil down what Realcomm was or what the mission of Realcomm was, what do you say it is?
So it hasn't changed. Bring together like-minded people who are looking to rip apart existing business models of the built environment, use technology to create efficiencies and better environments. Okay, that literally hasn't changed in 25 years. Now, interestingly, the IBCon story, that showed up about 12 years ago. We always had, since 2002, a track inside Realcomm on smart buildings, maybe 4 sessions, maybe 8. But I think it was in probably the 2005-06 timeframe we said, this conversation is getting big unto its own. And I think it was probably about 11 or so years ago where we pulled the smart building conversation out of Realcomm, which was predominantly for real estate operational people to talk about things like accounting and lease administration and those types of things, to the building side, the smart building side. And that's when we created IBCon, Intelligent Buildings Conference. And the tagline is the Smart, Connected, High Performance, Intelligent, Interoperable, Sustainable Buildings Conference. And we intentionally, we haven't added sustainability because you could put net zero. I mean, the point was there's so many different conversations going out there, especially around sustainability. And my answer has been really quick for 25 years. You cannot have a green, low carbon, zero emission building without a ton of technology. So we maintain that smart building is the way to go, smart, intelligent, right, connected. And then once you come up with a strategy to create a smart, connected environment, then you can really go to town with all these different devices, really acting in an interoperable way. But let me expand on that history question. Let me share with you 5 quick infograms that will give you a better idea of where the history. Okay, so
And just for everyone listening, if you're listening on the podcast, like Spotify or Apple, something like that, this is all available on YouTube as well. And so these infographics that Jim is showing will be available in that recording as well. But yeah, Jim, go ahead. This is great.
Okay, so we wrote this one in 2016. Actually, it's probably 2015 by the time we started first designing, because so many people were coming into the industry and said prop tech was new. I said, no. I said, the worst thing a new generation can do is ignore the work of generations before them. If you, and I've had people tell me I'm going to run into a building with a few technologies in the cloud and I'm going to automate it. And I said, just wait. You have got, a building with 30 years worth of 30 different vendors and different iterations and different platforms and different, SKU numbers. I said, it is not easy. So we put this together sort of as an educational piece to allow the new people coming in the industry saying, look, it's not new. So if it's not new, what is it? We go all the way back to 1980 to 1995, phase 1, property management, accounting, lease admin, building automation, the Johnson, Honeywell, Siemens of the world, integrated workplace management, asset management. These platforms have been around forever to run the basics of both the enterprise side of the business and the built environment. Phase 2, 1995 to 2002, we call that the dot-com era. Crazy, stupid money chasing ideas with not a lot of depth. It ended in dot-bomb in 2002. We knew that was going to happen. And then phase 3 is post-dot-bomb, where the good companies, good management teams, good ideas, good business plans, they survived. But 80% of the companies from the dot-com hype stage did not make it. Remember that point when we talk about where the industry is today. Phase 3, again, the post.com, we've got a lot of good companies showing up, but a lot failing. Phase 4, that's 2009 to 2016. That's when this whole money thing started in our industry. And it's now going into its 14th year. We've had no recalibration. We've had some companies lose valuation, but on the public prop tech side of the business, the companies that I've analyzed in the last year have lost 60 to 80% of their value because I can see their data, I can see the valuations. There are thousands of companies sitting behind closed door, private companies, that if you assume they also lost 60 to 80% of their value, we have a reckoning coming that's been much worse than we've even seen to date. I'm watching that on a daily basis. I'm talking to everybody I possibly can to get the data to see where that side is. And then phase 5, we actually introduced a lot of these technologies at Realcomm 2016. We followed general technologies and said, how are they going to impact the built environment? AI, machine learning, blockchain, robotics, all these new things. And now we're seeing, this is now going 7 years later, we're finally starting to see AI be applied to HVAC, AI be applied to some other building systems. First inning. Still. So we're 7 years into this, and we're still in the first inning on these general techs making their way into buildings. Okay, so that's just a little primer on the history. As far as it relates to building automation, this one's real simple: past, present, future. Past, building automation, proprietary, closed, one building, one system, one vendor. Present, smart, connected, open, integrated, interoperable, IP-centric, multiple buildings, multiple systems, multiple vendors. That's where I've been living for the last 20 plus years. Future, building Internet of Things, smart edge, cloud, AI, machine learning, autonomous. First, second inning. So what I ask people is, what number are you? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And that gives me an idea where their perspective on smart buildings are. We came up with this one, 2013, call it 10, 12 years ago. This is all those disparate systems onto a standard IP network, the data normalized, secured. That orange circle should actually be to the left. And then once you get it into that operating system we talked about, You can do all the cool things like, parse different functionality to different people, to different vendors, because it's IP, you can segment. The goals, my gosh, these goals haven't changed. Energy conservation, sustainability achievement, operational efficiency, occupant satisfaction, financial optimization. We came up with those 10 years ago. They're buzzwords today. They're not new. And PS, sustainability has failed twice in my career. So if we're not careful, we're going to spend a lot of money and energy on energy and sustainability. And I'm hoping we have better outcomes this time. The box in the far right corner on top is the autonomous building, machine, business process automation, machines talking to each other, talking to enterprise platforms. Fire extinguisher goes off, the door opens, right, kind of thing. That illustration here goes into not one building, but a more of a broader perspective of smart portfolio. And then a smart portfolio, a campus turns into a smart grid, could turn into a smart city. We haven't even left home for the ballpark yet, okay? I mean, I've been following smart cities for 35 years. There is not a smart city on the planet Earth, including Saudi Arabia and Dubai and all those places we've visited, that comes close to what an autonomous city could really be. People are trying, but it's not really been achieved anywhere. And then this is why, because it's complicated. This is what a corporate real estate facilities portfolio should look like. These are all the applications. These are all the communications that have to take place, the overlap of the data, that middle enterprise that takes aggregated data and comes up with one true address for the building, not ST, not STREET, not, without the street. So there's all sorts of things that happen at the communication layer, at the operating system layer, at the application layer, at the graphical user interface, at the presentation layer. If you go to that compute, the old compute methodology, same thing has to happen in the built environment, and we're just not there. So that's the little history lesson.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I like how you take different perspectives at the same thing, right? You could take a more simplified model. You could look at it from that architecture and what's the purpose and the goal. One thing that stood out to me a couple times, I'd be interested just to bend your ear about, is the idea of IoT or building IoT. You think Internet of Things, is that still a relevant term? Do you think it's been beat to death?
Yeah, but seriously, go back and read my 2002 article. Okay,
Yeah.
That's 21 years ago. It's not new. I called them appliances. Okay, because in the technology world, we called a printer an appliance. We called a scanner an appliance, right? And then we just plugged in that RJ45. The network understood it. We downloaded the drivers, and boom! All of a sudden, I saw my HP printer showing up on my Dell laptop. Okay, think about that, right? I can't do that today. So the whole IoT thing, I would actually break it down a little bit. IoT is more consumer based, I think, meaning watches and hats and underwear and running shoes. I mean, I've had shoes with BLE chips in the shoe that communicated to my phone that could do a complete physical or regimen of exercises based upon the data coming from my shoes.
Yeah,
I would call that IoT. I would put us more in the realm of industrial Internet of Things. Okay, and that means buildings, bigger things, systems. But Internet of Things, Internet of an HVAC system, Internet of an access control system, Internet of a lighting fixture, Internet of a fire extinguisher. It's the same thing. We're just calling it different things. I mean, I don't care what you call it. All I know is I got a bunch of equipment in a building that's old, wasting time, wasting energy, wasting money, that nobody knows where it is, what it's doing. And if we figured out a way to connect that equipment up and watch it a little bit more, we'd have lower operating expenses, and we'd have better engaging experiences for all those occupants. I mean, we're all worried about COVID and COVID detection now. I mean, do you know how many buildings have got filters in there with mold that it's distributing through the building for the last 20 years?
Yeah. Go open up a rooftop unit. I think a lot of people will be surprised what they see.
How about a little tiny penny sensor that we can probably figure out the battery life to last at least 10 years, which is longer than the filter should last. How about we put a little sensor on a filter in an old-fashioned air conditioning system that when that filter reaches a certain age, it sends an alert to the maintenance team, right? Or you can figure out is the filter in need of change? Is there some way to look at the filter, or gauge the dirt on the filter to determine that? But we're still managing our buildings with clubs as opposed to with lasers, and that's the problem.
That's right. So you say we're in the second or third inning, 25 years in. So we got a ways, but
Well, I'm only 25 years in. The industry has been around for 50 years. Okay. I mean, building automation in its basic form of systems and buildings, that's easily 50 years old. I've been at it for about 25 to 30. So I would say second inning based on my experience.
so then with that, we find ourselves in a pretty interesting market climate. What do you think that is going to do in terms of getting through inning 4, inning 5?
Yeah, that's the $1 billion question, because you would think that building owner operators would want to do this because it made sense. So when they had the money, they made the investment. And then when they don't have the money, they say, I don't have the money for the investment. So and I've seen this at least a half a dozen times in my career, where you go through a cycle, right? But I will tell you that every single cycle shakes out a few more innovators. And it's not because it's a cool thing to do. It's a fear of missing out thing to do. It's a shiny new object thing to do. It's like, I have to do this. I can't afford to send people into my buildings physically. I need to be able to monitor them remotely, like COVID, right? I can't afford maintenance teams because I either can't find enough qualified people or the people are too expensive. So I'm expecting some rough patches in the next couple of years, because the real estate market is sorting out some of its own financial problems, meaning I've got big debts. My tenants aren't returning to the office at the rate I thought they would. They're not renewing the leases. In some cases, they're big companies canceling leases, paying penalties, not moving back to those big buildings in those big cities. I mean, there's some cities in the Northeast or Northwest that are decimated because a major technology player is moving out of their downtown en masse, and they're taking with it the whole life and the energy of that downtown, right? So this whole COVID experiment turning into the I want to work remote, don't want to be on the freeway, and want more flexible time, I can be productive anywhere. I need you back in the office. You need the culture. There's this tension right now. It's called hybrid is what's going to result, but it's going to be some pain. But along the way, I think for those who are prudent and practical and smart and mature and get out of this hypey thing, there is a lot of great technology out there that can solve the absolute problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, where do you land on that work from home spectrum, if you will?
Why did it take so long to make this an issue? Deloitte and IBM pulled out of the South Bay, IBM from downtown Los Angeles, Deloitte from the South Bay of Los Angeles in 1987. Okay, that's 13 and 20, 35, 4 years ago, right? So they said, you're all working from home in 1987, and we've had fits and starts of this. Many organizations had mobile, salespeople. A lot of sales offices got closed because salespeople. So we've been playing with it for 25 years. WeWork said, well, let's play with it a little bit more, right? And then all of a sudden the pandemic came and taught everybody. We shouldn't have been in the position that we are, because if people were just embracing it as we went along the way, they'd have those new flex spaces, those tech immersive spaces. They'd have less space. They'd have figured out the traffic thing. I was in a meeting and I asked a bunch of seriously experienced real estate folks, have you taken your employee list and from the HR department and put it into a geomapping program so you could see where the people live in reference to corporate headquarters? In other words, maybe there's a whole slew of them up in the Northeast that maybe you should have less corporate headquarters, and maybe you should open up a little satellite office with, commuter buses between, or, little shuttles between, so they don't have to drive, and you can be efficient with transportation, and you can have really good visual telepresence type video conferencing in the two places. We didn't. We just nipped at the edges. So hybrid is the end result. I don't care what anybody says, but it's got to be hybrid with a crazy immersive experience in the office, because if it's just the same experience we can get at home with Teams or Zoom, people are going to resist. You got to give people reasons to go back to collaborate in ways never before seen And the only way you do that is with some of these new technologies that are coming out, which, by the way, we're going to be talking a lot about at Realcomm. We have been actually for the last, if you remember, during the pandemic, we built a studio in a ballroom in Denver, and Realcomm continued through the pandemic with various iterations of hybrid, experiences. And so we've got, we think, a pretty good idea of what hybrid looks like.
And you pulled that together pretty quick.
Yeah. The strategy was, our strategy is going to change every 24 hours. And what we said was, people said to me, like after we canceled Miami because of COVID, people said, you're going to do an event. I said, I'm going to do a hybrid event. They go, what's that? And I go, I'm not quite sure, but we're going to do one. And they laughed. And they said, can you give us any idea? I said, well, on one end of the spectrum, you've got go into the office only. And the other end of the spectrum, you can only, do a Teams or a Zoom call. And I said, I believe the answer is somewhere in the middle. And that was the premise we started with. And then we fully produced things and had all sorts of software platforms and different types of, camera technologies. And so, yeah, we have a pretty good, we believe we have a pretty good understanding of where hybrid's going to end up. And that's the kind of content we'll bring to the event, right? It's not going to be the old, well, here's your conference room and here's where you put your, 3,000 lumen projector. No, that's not the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah. And it's definitely not a 3,000 lumen projector.
Yeah. Whatever. I don't know what even projectors are anymore. I haven't owned one in years.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But you saw, you saw a little bit of that in Scottsdale where we had the people on the general session stage, same size as the people physically on the stage,
Right.
tried to make it feel. We pulled that together in 5 days with no budget.
Yeah,
So
that was very, very cool.
If we can pull that together in 5 days with no budget, people are spending some time and energy on this and money. We should be able to come to that new immersive environment.
So, rocky couple of years ahead of us. Again, things are going to be shaken out, particularly in the real estate space. How does that work? The hybrid model, how does that work? I think we are our most innovative as humans when there's some sort of pain or reason to be so. And I think I do agree that we're going to see some innovation come out of it.
The best. I believe we're going to see the best innovation.
Well, yeah, and the people that have been innovating and leading up to this moment, I think this is going to be a moment for them to shine in a lot of ways, to say, this is what we were talking about, and now, we're going to be able to realize it a little bit more. Not to take any thunder out of anything you're going to talk about at Realcomm or IBCon, but is there an innovation that you're particularly interested in or you think is going to be able to capitalize here in the short term?
And these are things, by the way, we've been talking about forever, but didn't get a lot of
Yep.
play on the radio, so to speak. Hybrid immersive, big topic. Okay, and why is it important to the corporates who come to our event? Because that's their environment. Why is it important to the landlords? Because if they don't understand what this means from a lease compression standpoint, from a needing better technology in the building standpoint, with being open to these ideas as a landlord, not shunning them or not understanding them, but leaning in. So I think hybrid immersive is big. I think cyber is big. I think 5G wireless. I mean, you talk about some of the costs associated with making a building smart, the cabling, ripping apart walls. I think we've got some wireless infrastructure, 5G, 6G, and beyond that are coming. But PS, we're going to have some conversations about China and how they're passing us. They are absolutely passing us on some of these leading technologies that if we don't become aware from a geopolitical competitive standpoint, not only are our buildings not going to survive, but we're not going to own the next 50 to 100 years of all the residual benefits come when you lead in a technology. They're ahead in facial, they're ahead in AI. Quantum is still up for debate. But the 5G world, which is something that touches us in the buildings, they are absolutely ahead. I've got a chart that we'll be showing a lot over the next few months where you look at the average download speeds of China Telecom and others in China compared to our three providers. They're 4 times faster. Okay, and this is just on the consumer rollout. Right. So as it relates to CBRS and the built infrastructure, the private networks and buildings, if you're dealing, with a network that's 1/4 the speed in the consumer level, what does that mean when you get to the business? And I'm just saying we have to pay attention to it. The other thing that we really like a lot, I personally like a lot, is the low voltage conversation. been having it for 15 years at Realcomm. The rooms are always empty. You want to save the world, convert from AC to low voltage DC in our buildings, flip the switch, electrify batteries in the basement, get rid of the lights, get rid of the access control. That's all AC. We'll probably have to work a little bit on the HVAC side. It's a heavy lift, but 80, 70%, even 60% of the things that go on inside buildings, including the laptops that you and I are both working on right now, those are low voltage native devices. And yet we convert to a brick to plug into an AC plug to, pump some wires down to a power plant that's being powered by natural gas or coal or, whatever. But, if it truly is 60, 70% more efficient, why haven't we ripped every AC device out of a building that we can and replaced it with a low voltage architecture? Holy grail. Holy grail.
Yeah. Wow.
If I had to pick one technology that I can only pick one going into the next 15 years, that's it. Well, if you do it right, it's power over Ethernet, right? So now you've got the data component. Not only are you powering the device, not new. Cameras have been doing this forever. Devices and building have figured this out about 10 years ago. But it needs to be bigger, and it needs to be the basis. And I saw this first time in Costa Rica. Well, actually, no, the first time I saw it was on a trip in 2004 in Japan when we were at Matsushita's corporate headquarters, and we were in this Panasonic digital showroom on the first floor. And this little Japanese guy takes a table lamp, like we probably have on our desks or in our houses, and he takes an RJ45 and he plugs it in. And we all go, "What are you doing?" And he powered the lamp with the RJ45, but then all of a sudden on a little monitor across the room, device. I think this is where I got the idea for that internet appliance, right? An appliance, light, manufactured, date manufactured. Date it first hit the network. How many, what kind of electricity is it consuming? How efficient is it running? Turning it up and down, setting up some rules. Everybody in the room just said, "We've just seen the Holy Grail."
Yeah.
When he treated that light like we were treating printers, workstations, and scanners. And that's the vision that I brought to Realcomm and IBCon that is catching on, but it still hasn't caught on at the level it needs to in 2023.
What's the biggest barrier to that, Jim?
You and me and this thing called humans. Yeah. Okay? Because the technology works. The technology, just like I saw many computers we can figure out the technology. Even if it's not perfect today, if we focused on it and we devoted some dollars in a concentrated way. But in some ways, I think we've lost our innovation DNA. We're not curious at the same level. I remember, when I was young in the industry, we go to ball games and in between pitches, we'd be talking about technology. At the end of the game for beers, we'd be talking about innovative projects. As a whole, as a society, I think we've lost our curiosity and our desire to make things better. Okay, so that's the first layer. And then underneath that, in the building environment, we've got too many conversations with too many different languages. We got to come together and start shedding the FOMO, fear of missing out, and the shiny new object syndrome. I hate that. It slows us down. And then at the end, we've got to look at ourselves and don't go out looking for new technology. Sit in rooms and say, what problems are we trying to solve? Once you figure out what problems you're trying to solve, then you go looking for the technologies. We got it backwards. I like to boast, Realcomm's got a huge exhibit floor. That's great. But you should be studying that exhibit floor weeks before the event. And you've got your team members going, okay, you three go to those 4 booths. You go to that pavilion. If you come into Realcomm and IBCon randomly looking for answers, you're not going to find them. You will be overwhelmed, tired out, confused by the first couple hours. We post the exhibitors up there. There's other events. We know who the vendors are. You got to do your homework, right? And then things will happen faster. And I think this necessity thing that of a tough market is going to force people to think like that. At least I hope it does. I really hope it gets us back to a more mature level, a model of innovation, and not just this random hypey thing, and more of a what problem are we trying to solve? Who are the vendors? Do the due diligence, hire somebody, do the beta, alpha, beta, and then run. It's not that complicated. It's not complicated.
Well, and you mentioned another thing there that's kind of an ongoing issue in our space, and that's hire someone. There's some labor issues out in the marketplace. Some tens of millions of jobs, not specifically in the building industry, but at large that are looking to be filled. What are some of the things that we can do?
We can benefit from all these high-tech layoffs. Are you kidding me? We find the right people from Amazon and Google, and we bring them into the built environment. We've been saying for years we get second, third because we don't offer the packages and we don't offer the compensation, but all those compensation packages are getting readjusted to reality. Okay, those people that are at those high tech companies who are making $500,000 to $1 million a year are probably getting laid off, or those packages are getting rethought. So there's going to be some recalibration, and
especially with the hybrid model.
Yeah, especially with the hybrid model. So I think those people who are going to want to innovate will continue to. And yes, we absolutely have a shortage of people in our industry, but that doesn't mean we can stop. We have to keep trying to find creative ways to get those resources.
So there's another aspect to the market right now that's pretty interesting. It's tied to the local real estate market as a whole and how that's impacting innovation with the labor issue, but it's capital markets as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's no bigger supporter of innovation than I. I've been doing it for 30 years. My track record speaks for itself. I've been out there promoting, pushing, cajoling, innovative new ideas to change the built environment. But I am a lot of concerned with the capital that's come into the market starting in around 2009 after the financial collapse. There was an abundance of money thrown into the market, and this idea that we just keep throwing money at ideas without homework. Has this ever been tried before? And there's one technology. You look inside of a building and you can kind of get an interior tour. I've seen that going all the way back to 1995, maybe. Okay. I've seen 4 iterations of that over the last 20 years. I've seen it fail a number of times. So those people who came out with this new technology had never seen it before. And everybody says, this is going to change the world. And they go, hold on, it's cool. And it's better than it was 20 years ago, but it didn't change the world. We have to know why. And P.S., you shouldn't have a 30x valuation. So I've been examining the capital markets on the public side recently in the prop tech space. And there's some, most of the publicly traded prop tech companies focus on the residential market. So that's the only data that we really have access to. And if it doesn't take, a financial analyst to look at, top 10 residential prop tech companies, look at the graphs when they went public to where they're trading now, that market's lost 70 to 80% of its value. Okay. Yeah. I mean, really serious drop in valuation. So one of two things, either that drop is going to hold and then come back to some level. But the question is, will it ever get back to its highs that it was pitched as being this panacea of change that it didn't turn out to be? Will it turn out to be just a normal old regular company, not a 30x, kind of thing? And then the other question we have to ask is, if that's what we're seeing in the public side, what's going on with all the private companies? I mean, there's 3, 4, 5, 8,000 prop tech companies out there. I love everybody who's interested in automating our industry. But there's some real serious questions about their business model viability, the management team, the idea. Was it really a company, or was it just, as I say, an automation sequence inside of a module, inside of a platform inside of an enterprise? I mean, I understand technology, know what an enterprise is. I know what an automation sequence is. And there are some people out there who fixed one tiny little problem in a real estate scenario and thought they had a company. Yeah. No. And so I do think that we're going to have some rough roads ahead. But frankly, I think we should have had rough roads ahead starting 3, 4, 5 years ago. We've now are 14 years into this money. And usually there's calibrations and there's, recalibrations, I should say, and kind of realignments. And since we haven't had those little ones along the way, I'm afraid that the next one could be a big one. But I'm not prognosticating. I'm not saying that's the case. I hope not. I really do.
Yeah, I hope not either. There's a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of press releases going out with Series B, Series C funding, and what that means for the industry as a whole. There's some questions.
Well, but what about the Series B, C, D that we saw 5 years ago that we don't hear about anymore, right? I mean, did they just go away? Are they still out there? I mean, in business, you need to reconcile investment in a certain time frame. It can't. I mean, when I first started my company, my software company, and we were looking for money, we ended up not taking it back in 1990. We just or I'm sorry, 1999, we decided we were going to go it on our own. But they said, here's your money. You got 36 months. You can either hit the 30x that we think, market domination and all the eyeballs and all the little words we used back then. And we believe you can, but if you don't, you better achieve sustainable cash flow because we're not giving you any more money. 36 months, you were done, right? Either you made it or you didn't. Maybe a couple people got an extra round because there was some merger activity going on or what have you. But now it's, Friends, Angel, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then IPO, and then the only data I've got is the IPO data, and it's fallen off the cliff. So I think it's fair to say we want more governance, we want shorter runways, and we want to see this money that we're investing paying off. And I understand that you got to date a lot to find the one you're going to marry. I get that, but I'm not sure that I believe totally in the model anymore. There might be a better way.
There's a number of companies out there that are that have sought quite a bit of funding. They've made a pretty big marketing splash. They're going to come in. They're going to revolutionize the industry with whatever kind of sensor, whatever sort of cloud-based system. And for the most part, they seem to be functional. But what the part they miss is that interoperability. So many times they go in and they say, we could solve your problem. Well, how can you tie into my HVAC system? Well, that's a roadmap item. Let's just go in, solve this problem, and then we could talk about interoperability later. We have started to get calls. So again, this production of KMC Controls. I work for KMC Controls. A majority of my time is spent selling KMC Controls and our cloud-based system and all that. But we've had more calls in the last 6 to 9 months about failed pilots with these siloed companies. Because they're not taking that industry legacy interoperability approach, whereas we've tried to take, and many others in the industry, this isn't unique to KMC necessarily, but we've tried to take that approach. It's like you got to understand that every building you go out to, even if it's the same customer and in that enterprise application, every building is going to be different. You're going to run into new and different things.
You would think that base level of homework would have been done, right? And to be fair, I when I wrote that article in 2002, 21 years ago, connecting buildings and internet appliances, connecting buildings and processes to the internet, I was sure 3 years after I wrote it, everybody would read it, say I was brilliant, and we'd be done. Okay. Well, guess what? Yeah. I had my head handed to me.
No one called you a genius?
No one called me a genius. Everybody called me a nut. And most people would have quit the third, fourth, fifth time they were called nut. But the point I want to make is what I got wrong, what everybody still gets wrong. The algorithm that needs to be put on the table and ripped apart underneath microscopes is the adoption timeframe. Everybody puts in their spreadsheet. I got the cure to cancer. Of course they're going to. I had one person say, I'm only investing in companies if they can disintermediate this XYZ enterprise player, which is one of the biggest. And I said, okay, I understand disintermediation, and I understood that those are the big plays. But do you know how hard it is to rip an accounting system out of a major real estate company?
Yeah.
In the years of planning that takes, and the political and cultural decisions that have to be made just for accounting, right? Which is one kind of system. Can you imagine the building when you got 10 of these, 15 different major players for HVAC, lighting, access control? Getting them to all sit down at a table and sing Kumbaya is not going to happen. Right. So if we could adjust everybody's adoption timeframes and realize that it's not easy. A lot of these people, this makes sense. Everybody's going to abide by it. No, they don't.
Right.
The business models, they don't have the money, they don't have the interest, they don't have the people. For some reason, they don't adopt. And so I want to challenge everybody, small, medium, and large. The big giants that have been around for 100 years, the ones that have been around since .com, and this new group of venture-backed startups. Everybody's got to come together. You got to listen to each other. You got to understand the realities of what it means to really change a building in a meaningful way. You got to throw out your spreadsheets. You got to stop with FOMO, fear of missing out. You got to stop with shiny new object. Otherwise, we are just going to continue to waste time, energy, and money. If we work together, we can be a powerful force. We really can.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think there's a better place than a location, an event like an IBCon or Realcomm to go and start having those conversations. Just last year, I had the pleasure of being on a panel with several people, and the conversations we had leading up to it, and then directly afterwards, was like, man, you're struggling with this problem and I'm struggling with this problem, and we can kind of meet up like right here, but then we also need this other person that can come and help. I mean, that's all it is. It's an opportunity to come together and solve real problems with real solutions.
What I'm proud is on our exhibit floor, you will see trusted and true companies that have been around for a long time that know what they're doing. You've got companies that are 10 years old or something, like I said, came out of the .com, 15 years that came out of the .com era. And then we have a slew of startups that in PS, those startups, when the floor is not busy, go talk to the people with all the experience for 30 years. It's not a us versus them thing. It's a we thing. We all play in this world together, and you cannot solve any problems, especially in a building, by yourself, because yes, there's hundreds of other systems that all want to talk to each other. And if you don't understand that, then you're probably not going to be successful.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. I think this conversation is an amazing open to our second season. And because a lot of what we talk about when we talk about where did we come from, is really helping to inform listeners now about what the history's been, whether for individuals or the industry or the companies that we're a part of. There's so much knowledge there that unless we have these conversations and remind each other of this history, we're going to be moving into the future more blinded than we should.
Well, if I could have one final thought. I read an article a while ago about the aerospace industry, where they were getting more and more concerned that there was this gap, and it has a lot to do with numbers and demographics, where the baby boomer was the big generation. Generation X behind that is a much smaller generation, and then following that are millennials, right? So if there's not enough Xers to take the jobs of the boomers, the boomers got to reach over the X's to the top level of the millennials, right? Because there's just not enough Xers to fill a 1-for-1 ratio with the boomers. And they were talking about how there weren't enough top level millennials. They were being stolen by other industries like finance or whatever. And that they were really, really concerned that all this intellectual property that it took to put a man on the moon, which we've done that. Who puts a rover on Mars? We've done that, right? All this incredible intellectual property was going to get lost because it doesn't get efficiently and effectively transferred to the next generation. If we are not careful in the built environment, in the smart tech, building tech, prop tech, whatever we want to call it, we will see an enormous vacuum between the transfer of intellectual property. And what it means is a horrendous loss of money, time, and energy. To your point, we could find ourselves 5-7 years behind other countries who are at different places in their evolution. China specifically one, India another. I mean, there's these other countries that are just approaching things differently, that we could find ourselves at a really bad competitive disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, and I hope and I pray that this project will spur other conversations, more locally at a micro level at companies. How can we better mentor our younger guys? How can we get this information? Sometimes pull this information and this knowledge that our more senior colleagues have, and how do we meet those together?
Yeah, everybody I know who's getting closer to those retirement years says they now feel a responsibility and something they just want to do to help transfer the scars, the pain, the failures. Everybody can figure out the good stuff. We want to transfer all the pain, in a non-painful way, so you can avoid the potholes, right? Get that from one very specific example in your spreadsheets. Get that implementation, get that adoption algorithm right, because most everybody's got it wrong. And final thought is, Realcomm IBCon, we invite everybody to the party. We want every aspect of the industry present, the whole ecosystem, from an analyst to an integrator to an end user to a manufacturer, from the young to the old, to the people with lots of money in the bank to the startups who just got their first couple million. The only way we solve this is to come together and fight like a team. Otherwise, the bifurcation is going to hurt us.
Yeah, I completely agree. No, and I can't think of a better place to do it. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Appreciate your time today, man.
And thank you for what you're doing. And let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I plan on reaching out here shortly. Trust me. All right. Yeah, that wraps this episode of the Building Geniuses podcast, a production of KMC Controls. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we encourage you to subscribe and share. And if there's anyone that you think should be on our podcast, tag them in the comments of a social post, or reach out to us on social, and we'll tag them in the comments. We'll reach out. As always, we appreciate you listening. And until next time, learn something new, teach someone something, and build your inner genius.